January 2010. A small-town attorney in Lake Forest, Illinois, opens an envelope that's been sealed for decades. Inside is a stock certificate, one single investment, made in 1935 for $300. By the time this envelope was opened, those 3 shares were worth $7 million. The woman who bought them? A grocery store clerk who never earned more than a modest salary in her entire life. Her name was Grace Groner, and her investment strategy was so simple, it fit on a napkin. Buy it and never sell. To understand Grace's story, we need to go back to 1935, right in the middle of the Great Depression. The stock market had crashed 6 years earlier, wiping out fortunes and destroying trust in American business. Most Americans had sworn off stocks entirely. They'd seen their neighbors lose everything. Banks had failed. Companies had collapsed. The idea of putting your hard-earned money into Wall Street seemed not just foolish, but reckless. But Grace Groner wasn't most people. She was a 25-year-old woman working at Abbott Laboratories in Lake Forest. Not as a scientist or executive, but as a secretary in the personnel department. She'd been orphaned as a child, raised by a family who took her in, and she understood something important about survival. Small, steady decisions compound over time. This story matters today because we're living in an era where everyone's looking for the quick win. The hot stock, the cryptocurrency that'll moon, the get-rich-quick scheme. Grace's story reminds us that real wealth often comes from the most boring decision imaginable, doing nothing. Grace Groner made her first investment in 1935 with the money she'd carefully saved from her secretary's salary. She bought 3 shares of Abbott Laboratories stock for about $100 per share. Now, $300 in 1935. That's roughly $6,000 in today's money. For someone making a modest salary during the Depression, this represented real sacrifice. This was months of careful budgeting, skipped luxuries, and genuine risk. Why Abbott? It wasn't complicated research or insider knowledge. Grace worked there. She saw the company every day. Abbott made pharmaceuticals, things people needed regardless of economic conditions. People got sick in good times and bad. The company seemed stable, well managed, and it paid a small dividend. That was enough for Grace. What happened next is where most investment stories take a turn. Market crashes, panic selling, buying high and selling low. But Grace's story is different, precisely because nothing happened. She bought those 3 shares, put the certificate in an envelope, and went back to work. Let me paint a picture of what Grace chose not to do over the next 75 years. In 1937, the market crashed again, a brutal recession that saw stocks fall 49%. Financial advisors told their clients to sell everything. Grace kept her 3 shares. She watched her coworkers panic, heard the stories of people losing their savings again, and she held on. World War II began. Abbott's stock fluctuated wildly as the war effort consumed the economy. Defense stocks soared. Consumer goods companies struggled. Again, conventional wisdom said to move your money, chase the war economy. Grace didn't sell. The post-war boom of the 1950s arrived. New industries exploded: televisions, automobiles, suburbs, consumer culture. Everyone was talking about the next big thing. Your neighbors were making money in real estate, in new technology companies, in the booming consumer economy. Grace could have sold her Abbott shares. They'd done well, and bought into these exciting new opportunities. She didn't. The 1960s brought the go-go years of investing. Growth stocks, conglomerates, companies promising revolutionary change. Abbott seemed old-fashioned by comparison. A pharmaceutical company? How boring. The real money was in electronics, in aerospace, in the future. Grace kept her Abbott shares. Then 1973 hit. the worst bear market since the Depression. Stocks fell 48% over 2 years. Inflation raged. The economy seemed broken. Financial experts suggested moving to gold, to bonds, to anything but stocks. Grace was now in her 60s, approaching retirement. This would have been the sensible time to protect what she had, to sell and move to safety. She didn't. The 1980s boom arrived. Technology stocks started their massive run. Personal computers, software, the information age. Abbott was just a pharmaceutical company making steady, predictable products. Grace could have sold and bought into Microsoft, Apple, Intel, companies that would make spectacular returns. She held her Abbott shares. The 1987 crash, Black Monday, saw the market fall 22% in a single day. Grace was in her late 70s now. She'd lived through the Depression, World War II, multiple recessions and crashes. She'd seen this pattern before. She didn't sell. The dot-com bubble of the late 1990s was perhaps the most extreme temptation. People were making fortunes overnight in internet stocks. Your mail carrier was giving stock tips. Dinner conversations revolved around day trading. Abbott stock seemed like a relic. This old pharmaceutical company, while the world was being revolutionized by technology. Grace was in her late 80s now. She didn't sell. Then the dot-com crash of 2000 to 2002. Trillion-dollar companies evaporated. Fortunes vanished. Those internet millions turned out to be paper profits that disappeared. Abbott, meanwhile, kept doing what it had always done, making medical products, paying dividends, growing steadily. Grace didn't need to do anything because she'd never chased the mania in the first place. The 2008 financial crisis. The worst economic catastrophe since the Great Depression. The very era where Grace had begun her investing journey. The market fell 57%. Grace was 98 years old. If there was ever a time to sell, to protect your wealth, to get out before it all collapsed, this was it. She didn't sell. Here's what was happening behind the scenes during all those decades. Abbott Laboratories was paying dividends. Small amounts at first, but consistent. And Grace, true to her strategy, automatically reinvested every dividend to buy more shares. She never took the cash. She never spent it. Those dividends bought fractional shares, which paid more dividends, which bought more shares. This is the power of compound growth that Albert Einstein allegedly called the eighth wonder of the world. 3 shares became 6. 6 became 12. 12 became dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. Every stock split, and Abbott split its stock multiple times, increased her holdings. Every dividend reinvestment added more. Grace never added another dollar of her own money after that initial $300 investment in 1935. Everything else was growth and reinvestment. Grace lived an extraordinarily frugal life, but not because she was poor, because that's who she was. She lived in a small one-bedroom house she'd bought decades earlier. She drove the same car for years. She didn't travel extensively or buy luxury goods. Her coworkers at Abbott had no idea she was sitting on a growing fortune. To them, she was just Grace. Friendly, quiet, reliable Grace who worked in personnel and never made a fuss. She retired from Abbott after 43 years of service. The company gave her a nice retirement party, a pension, and best wishes. Nobody knew that this secretary had become one of Abbott's most successful shareholders, simply by never selling the stock she'd bought when she was 25 years old. Grace Groner passed away in January 2010 at the age of 100. When her will was read, people were stunned. This woman who'd lived in a modest house, who'd never appeared wealthy, who'd worked as a secretary her entire career, she left $7 million to Lake Forest College, her alma mater. The entire fortune came from that single investment in 1935. 3 shares of Abbott Laboratories, stock that she'd never sold. The college established the Grace Groner Scholarship Fund, which continues to help students who, like Grace, need financial support to achieve their education. Her $300 investment has now sent hundreds of young people to college. The lesson here isn't that everyone should buy one stock and hold it forever. That's too simple, and honestly, too risky. Most companies don't survive 75 years. What Grace's story teaches us is deeper. She understood the enormous cost of being wrong versus the enormous benefit of being right and patient. She understood that time in the market beats timing the market. She understood that doing nothing is sometimes the hardest and most profitable decision you can make. Grace Groner never wrote an investing book. She never appeared on financial television. She never gave seminars on wealth building. She just made one decision in 1935 and had the discipline to stick with it through 75 years of temptation, panic, manias, and crashes. In a world obsessed with action, with making moves, with beating the market, sometimes the most radical thing you can do is nothing at all. If you live through any of these market crashes, 1987, 2000, 2008, or if you remember older relatives talking about the Depression and how it shaped their view of money and risk, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. These economic lessons, these memories of how regular people built or lost wealth, need to be preserved for the next generation.